I suppose many say it, but I don't know where to start. This experience has not yet ended and has accompanied me for the last 12 years. It has accompanied us all, my family and close people who, without seeing or fearing it, have also been part of this story. But to begin with, I must go not only to 2008, I suppose, when the experience began for me, but before, much before, until the 80s, until a small and quiet town in Guanajuato, home of my grandmother and my maternal family. My grandmother was always very attached to the priests of the place, and she was always one of those ladies who passed her around in the church, helping, giving of the little she had to the others. But it wasn't always like that. Before it wasn't so little, because when her children finished school, and she was alone in the place, she donated everything she had for the poorest people in the town, and she lived only from the pension of her grandfather. On some occasion, when I was giving catechism to a group of girls, a very alarmed person arrived, looking for the priest, asking for help in a desperate way. My grandmother, seeing that poor man like that, coming down from a donkey so dead of thirst and tired as he was, ran to look for the father, thinking that it was an accident and someone who needed the holy oils on the way. He asked the girls to attend to him and give him water while she looked for him. He went out of the back of the church and looked towards the hill where the father went out continuously to be alone, to pray, when he walked to the path. He raised his gaze again. Where he ended up on the horizon, he noticed a woman dressed in black. White hair, very long up to the waist. By the wind, this one flew in his face. My grandmother could not see his face, but she knew that it was not a woman of the town. And although she was afraid, a strange fear that provoked this woman, she kept walking up, towards her. He approached that woman, who remained still there, despite the strong wind that had been released from one moment to another, a wind that seemed to have brought with it black clouds that announced a storm. He heard their names screaming. He turned to the church. It was the young priest with the girls from the catechism. The grandmother turned around and started walking as she could, with her bad knees, down the path. The girls ran to help her. "Who is that woman?" asked the father, who kept looking at that figure at the top of the hill. "I have no idea, father," responded the grandmother. "That figure looked like a ghost." The father threw a blessing at her, making the sign of the cross, and that woman turned around and got lost in the horizon. That poor peasant who had arrived tired came from afar. He said that when he asked for help from the priest of his town, he refused. And he began to travel one by one, little towns, looking for the help he needed, which they urgently required there in his community. But no one wanted to do it. He locked himself up with his father to tell him about his situation in private. After an hour, he asked him to go out to make a call. When the father left his office, he announced that he could not help him either, that he was sorry but that it was not possible. He told him to call the police, but the peasant began to cry and said that there was no police in his community. That there was nothing left, that there was no hope left. He went out and looked for his donkey, and he started the road to the next town. From the entrance of the church, the father yelled to him to return to his house, that no one could help him, that they would not leave him. But the young man continued without paying attention. The grandmother, as she could, ran with her bad knees to reach him. That poor donkey could barely walk, so it didn't cost him much work. Boy, what's wrong with you? Why do you need so much help? I can't tell you, ma'am." "Excuse me. I have to go on. I have to get help. Whatever it is, you can tell me, son. Let me help you." My grandmother had no idea why she said that. She didn't know what was happening to her. But something in her heart, made her say these words with the greatest certainty with which she had said anything before in her life. "For God's sake, son, with Jesus as a witness, I'm going to help you," she said. And the young man then stopped. "Maybe if you see him, you believe him. Maybe you should listen to him. Come to my town with me, please." My grandmother felt, but she refused to go up with him, that poor donkey that seemed to be going to die at any moment. They approached the church, where my grandmother told the father to take care of that poor animal, who would accompany the peasant to his town, walking if necessary. But the father lent them his little truck and gave them his blessings so that they could go. They then set off on their way to the little town of that young man, a town with a bunch of houses, whose plots extended to the hills. The sky remained black, and although it was barely 6 in the afternoon, it seemed that it was about to get dark at any moment. Grandma said she felt like it was going to get dark forever. They arrived at the town, and the young man asked her to follow him for a long time, and he marked a small path. "There I live, mother. There is my little house. But the truck is not going to get up to it." They left the vehicle when there was no space left, and then he helped my grandmother climb a few hundred more meters, until they turned a path, and the people lost sight of the town, down there, in the distance, and my grandmother was invaded by a feeling of loneliness. It was very strange for her that since my grandfather had died she had felt permanently accompanied by him, and by God, but there he no longer felt it. At the end of the road he noticed the light inside a wooden house, barely illuminated by a light hung naked at the door. "We're here, ma'am." "There it is. Come on." They got to the house, and when they opened the door they found an old lady, lying on the floor. "Grandma," said the young man. "Is she all right?" They helped her get up between the two of them, and the lady could hardly ask if she had brought the help. "Yes, Grandma, this lady is going to help us. She's going to see that what we say is true, and she's going to help us convince a little father to come. You'll see. Where is my sister? She has to see her. Se mi volvio a salir, mijo. No le pude detener. Pero ya sabes donde va a estar. Ala en el panteón. El joven salió corriendo sin decir nada, preocupado. Y mi abuela, como pudo, salió apurando el paso detrás de él. Subieron unos cientos de metros más, hasta el panteón, donde, antes de llegar, escuchó a una mujer gritar. He immediately thought it was that girl they were talking about, but then he heard a second scream, and then a third voice. Suddenly it seemed that there was a group of women up there. Filling the echo of synchronized roars that formed a kind of macabre chant, he managed to see the pantheon and the young man enter it running. And meters later, like a young naked woman, he seemed to dig, like a wild animal, a grave. The young man, as he could, controlled her, took her by the hands, and the grandmother wanted to keep walking, help her, but she could not. Something had nailed her to the floor. She couldn't say a word. She couldn't even pray for any reason. But she saw how the boy carried the woman and left in a hurry from that old cemetery. It looked like she was hundreds of years old. By the time she got to the grandmother, the young woman already looked unconscious. "Come on, ma'am, don't leave me here. Los gritos se seguían escuchando al fondo. Y la abuela tuvo que preguntar. ¿Quién grita, muchacho? ¿Quiénes son esas mujeres? Déjela, señora. Vengues, por favor. Le dijo mientras dio media vuelta para ver de nuevo al panteón. Camine, madre. Camine, por favor. Y por lo que más quiera. No vaya a voltear." The grandmother then walked by the boy, helping to hold the young unconscious, and those screams behind seemed to approach. It seemed that they were already a few meters away from them, walking behind a few steps. The grandmother could not pray. The words did not come out. She could not think of any prayer, and at some point she had the strength to finally do it, in a very low voice. But somehow, that was enough for those voices to start to move away. They arrived at the house where the lady went to receive them, and they all put the girl in a bed. Luego mi abuela vio con terror como entra aquel muchacho y su abuela ameriban a la muchacha a la cama. ¿Qué tiene? ¿Quiénes son esas mujeres en el panteón? Son las brujas, dijo la abuelita de los muchachos. Desde que yo era niña vivo aquí. Bajan dos o tres veces al año, pero ahora están viniendo todos los días. Desde que mi muchacha está mal, la quieren embarazar. Se la llevan en la noche para que el diablo la embarace. Mi niña cada vez está peor. Ya no parece ella casi nunca. Pareciera que hablan otras gentes dentro de ella, pero no sabemos cómo ayudarla. The dog of the house began to bark out there. Mi abuela se asomó por la ventana. Standing on the road about 40 meters from the house there was again that woman in black and white hair, the same one who had seen her there in the church earlier. She wants to take her, said the boy as he went out to yell at this woman. The next part of the story becomes somewhat confusing because we know little about the ritual that continued, and because several uncles have different versions. What we all agree on, in the stories we know, is that the grandmother returned the next morning to the town, assuring that she had seen things that made her be sure that that poor girl really needed an exorcism ritual. But no one listened to him. They ignored him as much as that poor peasant boy, until the young priest of the church gave him a name and an approximate address. He had to go to Guanajuato and look for Father Lucas. A few days later he did it, with the help of one of my aunts who took her. They found that old Italian who seemed like anything but a priest. His house was more like a painting workshop, and he explained to them that he had more than 3 decades of having left the church, of having fled Europe, where he spent all his life, traveling to several countries. Now he lived peacefully in that city, in Guanajuato, painting paintings that no one bought him, but that was the least he cared about. He lived peacefully. He was happy, but fate always reaches us. He told them. My grandmother explained what was happening to him, and the Lord told him to apologize, but that his heart was already in the last. It would not be of great help. He would no longer last more than a few hours in a ritual like that. In the end, they would only have to deal with my body. Like one more problem. He told them. He then told them about his story, of what he did, that before his retirement he was one of the last exorcists who participated in more than 15 rituals, that, literally, in his words, he had seen Lucifer in the eyes. He looked in a wooden box with a key, opened it and took out a crucifix. This is the most powerful weapon I ever counted in my career. I told them, this is a crucifix used in exorcisms for generations, for hundreds of years. At some point my mentor gave it to me, but I no longer had anyone to give it to. When I said this, my grandmother extended it to her. Do what you do. Go ahead with what you do. Never destroy it, take it because you will need it, but later you will have the responsibility to take care of it forever. That was the last time they saw Father Lucas, who never managed to explain what this powerful crucifix could cause. Then my grandmother, with that crucifix in hand and with the young priest of her church, without carrying out an exorcism per se, they did go every night to that little house until the young woman became her again. She never wanted to describe what they did. It was a secret that she was going to take to the grave, but she did ask my mother that when she died, she would observe that crucifix forever, despite everything, despite what it was, that she would not leave it there in her little house in Guanajuato when she died, a house that she ended up donating to the church so that they could make an orphanage. She asked him to take it from there, that she was the one who lived the farthest, that she should have it. My grandmother was almost 90 when she died, on July 16, 2008. We went to bury her, and days later we returned home. My mother had with her that wooden box in her hands. When we got home, and all the lights were on, they burst. We had to guess what was next. We had to see the ad of the darkness that was coming upon us, of the time of darkness that was coming. When my brother was almost a baby, they gave him a rag. At some meeting at home, one of my mother's friends from work came who loved us a lot and brought her mother with her. The lady was delighted with the baby, and days later she sent him that beautiful little doll. It looked more like an ornament than a toy, but she said it was for him. Inside, he felt almost like a porcelain skeleton, and he could move in a certain way that adopted positions. When he was a little over a year old, my brother, when he was already walking and asking for certain toys in particular, he asked for it for the first time. Hasta entonces había estado en un mueble, al lado de su cama, como velando su sueño permanentemente. Pero entonces insistió en llevarlo consigo siempre. No había forma de que se sintiera seguro si no estaba consigo aquel juguete. Dormía con él, comía con él, platicaba con él. Tan solo lo dejaba cuando lo bañaban, pero tenía que estar allí, cerca. Cuando escuchábamos los cascabeles del harlequin, sabíamos que mi hermano se acercaba. Aquellos cascabeles corrían sin parar por toda la casa. It even became a recurring joke that the two of them were together forever. At some point my brother told us his name, and we all started calling him that. A name that, so far, we cannot mention, and that I would not dare to write even. And it is that at some point, my brother began to leave the harlequin outside, there in the patio, behind a hedgehog. Lo recagiamos y lo mediamos pero el bajita como en secreto nos pedía que lo volviéramos a sacar que no lo tiráramos nos decía pero que por favor no lo dejáramos entrar tardo un tiempo en decirnos porque el mismo tiempo en que nosotros pasábamos aquel muñeco de un lugar a otro en el patio sin ganas de tirarlo por si en algún momento mi hermano lo quería de nuevo o simplemente para tenerlo como recuerdo de aquellos primeros años en que mi hermano lo amó tanto pero en algún momento cuando estábamos lejos de casa le preguntaron por casualidad a mi hermanito por qué le había dejado de gustar. He said that because he had shown his face. He told my brother that the doll was talking to him, that he had been his friend, that he had taught him words that we did not use, but that at some point he asked him if he wanted to see him for real, his real face. My brother answered yes, and then he showed it to him. Behind that face of harlequin, for me already sufficiently terrifying enough, he showed him a face of red eyes, a pale smile, dripping with blood from his mouth. He asked my brother why he had blood, scared, and the doll replied that he had just eaten. My brother asked him what he was eating, and he said that then the doll touched his chest. At that moment we still did what any normal family would have done to think that it was a child's fantasy, although of course we knew that there was no way for him to ask the doll again, and we kept it in a wooden room that we had in the patio with some of the tools that my father left and some boxes of things that we no longer used there. That harlequin ended up locked, but not forever. For that time, since my dad was gone, my uncle Marco lived with us. He helped us with the housework, but above all he was there to take care of my mom, so emotionally affected in those months. My uncle was a rock. That's why he surprised us that time when we heard his voice screaming and coming out knocking on the back door to run to the patio. When we saw him lost among the trees. I remember that my mom and I left, but as we left, my mom for some reason told me to come back, to come in and see that my little brother was fine. That's how I did it, and when I entered his room, I saw him praying in his bed. Something common when I was about to sleep, but strange at that moment, in the middle of the night. Seguía rezando por su ángel de la guarda. La única oración que conocía el harlequin esta ala afuera me dijo otra vez. That phrase, those words, this is another of the things that I could not explain, but when he told me again, in that moment I realized that he had already told me before, that he had told me that at night the harlequin called him. He went and showed him his other face, he threatened him from the patio, he yelled at him to let him in, but no. It was as if I had never heard it before. I never answered her, I never said anything to her, I never told my mom. It's as if something had blocked me so that I wouldn't hear it really during all that time. When I looked out of her window to the patio, I saw that my mom and my uncle were walking back to get home. I left the room, and from the stairs I heard what my uncle was saying. And I went down a few steps to see them. My uncle was pale and sweating. He told my mom that he left his room, the only one on the first floor, and that he went to the kitchen for something to eat. When he came back, he noticed something in the yard, something that moved in the dark. He could see it through a grudge in the curtain, and when he approached her, he recognized that silhouette. It was that doll of harlequin, standing, looking at my brother's window on the second floor, and he made him mucus. With his hands he opened his mouth as if to scare him. When my uncle shouted and opened the curtains suddenly, that thing turned and then ran into the darkness, towards where my uncle also ran, taking a shovel that was in one of the plants when he left the house. He heard the chimes, and then he paid attention. In the background, in the darkness, he could see him, in the plants, hidden, clad. He threw a strong blow with the shovel and felt how he hit him, how he got in full, how he fit in, as if he were flesh and not a doll. And he saw a face between the branches, with a face of pain and eyes full of hatred. He said he could see him run towards that old barb of the bottom brick, but he just couldn't see where he got into. It was when my mother ran to the patio and yelled at him, begged him to calm down and pulled him in, to tell him everything, to explain to him what he had seen out there. And when he did, my mother did not question him. In fact, they both went to look in that wooden room to check with disconcert that doll had disappeared. Todas las fotos de mi hermano de aquel entonces están cortadas todas en donde aparecía aquel muñeco que son prácticamente todas las que le tomamos y mi hermano dejó de mencionarlo y cuando mi mamá mejoró mi tío que ya nunca fue el mismo y sonreía cada vez menos regresó a su casa y pensamos que nunca más tendríamos que volver a pensar en aquel muñeco en aquel harlequin. Pero estábamos equivocados. Days after my grandmother died, we returned home. My mother had that box with the crucifix inside in her hands. When we entered, all the lights went out and we had to assume what followed. We had to see the announcement of the darkness that was coming upon us, that was coming. My brother, who was already 18 years old at the time, changed the lights while I helped my mom find a space in her wardrobe to put that box and keep it as well as my grandmother did. Maybe you don't believe me about this experience with the harlequin I just told you about, but until then my family didn't care about things like paranormal. That ended up being a story we didn't revisit. The fantasies of a child, perhaps the imagination of an uncle who half asleep thought he saw something else in the shadows, but it is not something that would have marked us. Also, it had been a long time since we had seen my uncle, who since then did not visit the house, and he just greeted us from afar at family meetings. That is why he hit us more so hard. What was about to happen? Aquella primer noche en la que me desperto en la madrugada, el sonido de mi madre vomitando en su cuarto al lado del mío me preocupó y me levanté fui a su cuarto para ver si se encontraba bien. Cuando toqué la puerta aquel sonido cesó y mi madre preguntó desde adentro si era yo quien tocaba. Le respondí que sí y me dijo que pasara. When I got in, I noticed that my mom was peeking out of the bed, from among the blankets, and I was surprised. I thought she was very sick and that she had vomited in the bed, so I quickly approached her, asking her what she had. Mucho miedo, she answered. Miedo? Te escuché vomitar, mamá. ¿Qué tienes? Yo no estoy vomitando. I heard it again. The sound came from inside that wardrobe where we had kept the crucifix. We didn't even open those doors. We left my room, and after praying for an hour, we slept together there. Shivering, we called my Aunt Martina the next morning. She had returned to the village a few years earlier to take care of the grandmother. Although, as I told you, the house of the grandmother no longer belongs to the family, my aunt built one very close to the back, and somehow the people of the town took it as an extension of my grandmother. The ladies of the church now passed by her. The people asked for advice when they ran into her on the street, in the market. My aunt understood from before my grandmother died how important her figure was for those people, and she decided to help as much as she could. At that moment, alone and with her big children, she was in a position similar to when her grandmother decided to give her life to God and the people of the town. But we talked to her that morning and she didn't answer. She was in the church. Insistimos y pudimos contactarla ya hasta por la noche cuando nos dijo que la sorprendió que no la hubiéramos hablado antes apenas saliendo del pueblo regando por regresar el crucifijo. Yo solo sé que siempre que alguien necesitaba la ayuda de mi mamá en el pueblo ella iba hasta sus casas acompañada nada más de ese crucifijo, and when he came back he kept it very well. Back there from the altar to San Miguel, my aunt told me. He has, I don't know, a lot of energy. When she got sick and we took her to the hospital, I brought the crucifix to the house, and I don't know if you believe me, but that day my aunt took a long break, as if she were taking forces to say the following. That day at noon I went out to water my plants, taking advantage of the fact that I had come to rest, and I saw with a look out the window how someone was walking inside the house. It scared me a lot, but I went up to see who it was, to see if it was a thief or someone I knew, and I thought I was inside, but it was an old man without a shirt and with his skin very burned as if he had been in the sun for 2 days. Estaba ali parado en medio del salón de espaldas a mí y me movía a la siguiente ventana para ver la cara. No lo hubiera hecho, no era una persona viva, pues tenía la cara borrosa como si la saliera humo, se veía como si estuviera quemada y se los juró que estaba borrosa, as if I could not focus it, but the rest of the body looked good, and I know that it caused that crucifix because when I took it to my mother's house I did not see or feel anything strange here in the house. But let me find out more, let me talk to the Father while you keep it well please, and if you can have the holy water in your My aunt spoke to us until the following weekend, although she asked us if we were doing well by messages. In those messages, we briefly told her what we were living, during the nights first, and then also during the day. In the house, a person was heard coughing, as if she were sick. Se escuchaba como alguien vomitaba, pero ya no solo salía del armario sino de todos los rincones de la casa como si fuera de las paredes, como si viniera de adentro. Mi mamá y yo nos moríamos del miedo, pero mi hermano se rehusaba a creer y se burlaba de nuestra precaución. He didn't believe in anything at all, and better not, if he hadn't had to deal with the sequels of that partner he had when he was just a baby. My mom and I slept in the same room. My brother stayed in his. Now he slept downstairs for more privacy, in that room where my uncle stayed years before, as you may remember. For the regular, if I got up at night, my mother got up with me, and vice versa. But one of those nights, my mother woke up with so much thirst, but with so much sleep too, that she completely forgot about the situation we were living in. She got up like nothing and went down to the kitchen. She heard some chimes inside my brother's room, that had the door open. She walked slowly to there. She pushed her very slowly, very carefully. The light was off. The bed was tense. My brother was not there. And my mother assumed that she had climbed up to stay in my room because deep down she did not want to be alone down there. She was about to close the door and climb when a rattle was heard from behind the bed. The peaks of the hat of a harlequin came out, a hat that my mother recognized immediately, but with a difference. It looked much larger, as if it were of real size, as if behind the bed there were no dolls, but a person. She closed the door and ran up. She quickly touched my brother, who was in my room, and he brought us all together. He took out the crucifix, and we all slept together while my mother held him tightly in her hands. She didn't even have to tell my brother what she had seen. He could feel it. He had returned. He had returned for him. Something had brought him back. My aunt's call did not calm us down. That young father who had assisted the grandmother in the ritual was no longer a young man. He was an experienced priest who insisted that the aunt not worry about that crucifix, that he could not tell her more. He was very angry until after he said that we should leave him there in the grandmother's house in his place. But my aunt said no, that now he was in possession of one of his sisters, that his semblance changed. He asked that they return him immediately. It was an extremely powerful artifact, but at the same time with a terrifying destructive capacity, and he had to tell her the story. The story of a crucifix of hundreds of years used in exorcisms around the world, passing through the hands of exorcists through generations until it fell into the hands of the grandmother almost by chance, who was the only one willing to risk her life to save a soul. But the grandmother did not know how to use it, and that then young father who accompanied her, neither. And this crucifix, with certain power by itself, obtained through the faith of so many priests, of the triumphs before so many dark beings, became a threat. And the place in which it was a place where a tremendous reaction of any nearby astral sub-entity was expected. The priest also said that Father Lucas came to write to him and tell him a little about it. He said that the beings sent by Lucifer are always around us, very close, provoking us, and sometimes they sleep. They sleep for years or centuries, waiting to have a victim nearby. This crucifix was capable of awakening, of making react out of fear any demonic being with which it was found, or any spirit of evil. Nothing that reacts before this artifact is good, and it will provoke especially those entities that have never been human. He told my aunt to ask us to return it before something bad happens, but he could not receive it. And my mother did not want to take it to my aunt and think that she was going to have to suffer it, so she did something that we now know was a grave mistake. She drove to a forested area, leaving the city. She stopped next to the road. She went down and walked among the trees, always feeling the presence of someone behind her. When she reached a tree burned by a ray, she felt that it was the place that was sufficiently lost as to do it, and then she buried there the crucifix. The worst was coming. In my family we have never been believers of the paranormal. Well, to be more specific, yes, we believed, but we never lived terrified by the possibility of encountering something like that. I suppose that in that spectrum we find the majority at some point, or at least the majority of those of us who listen to channels like this. We know that there is something out there that cannot be scientifically explained, but we do not live terrified by the darkness. But I, however, always had a certain repulsion towards witches, towards the satanic. I suppose because at some point in my childhood I heard the story of my grandmother, of how there in the town she had to rescue from the claws of the devil and the witches that came down from the hill, to a poor young woman, after her family sought help and the church could not offer it. Yes, probably it was that. That's why that afternoon, about to get dark and when I was alone at home, my stomach was rumbling when I heard those knocks on the fence of the house. That's why when I saw at the door of the street a woman in black and very white hair in front of our house, calling us, my legs were bent and they made me fall. I don't know how absurd this may sound, but in my house we had weeks suffering from paranormal manifestations almost at any time of the day. But for some reason, that woman on the street, terrified me like nothing had ever done before. It's as if I had remembered it. Maybe someone has an experience like that, knowing someone through a story, from the stories. Forming such a detailed image in your imagination that eventually coincides perfectly with someone you run into in real life. And I didn't think this was a coincidence, or some poor woman who looked like it. It was her. I had no doubt. I could feel it. The woman at the door was that witch from the grandmother's stories. I got in and I just looked out the window. I saw her there, with one hand on the fence, humming, as if trying to see inside, as if trying to guess who was in the house. She tried to open the door, but it was closed with a lock for some strange reason, because we always leave it open, but I thanked heaven that on that occasion it would not have been like that. She kept walking down the bench, and when I lost sight of her, I ran to the phone to call my mother, to tell her to hurry up, to come home quickly, that there was a strange woman out there. The first wireless phone I found was dead, and I had to run to the other side of the stairs. It didn't give me a line. I heard static from the other side, and I saw through the window that led to the backyard how that woman walked very slowly. I was already inside the patio. I directed my look towards the back door to discover that I did not have the insurance. I ran towards her, and I managed to stop her just when someone opened it from the outside. I managed to open it about 20 centimeters, but I let myself go with all my weight, with all the strength I was able to keep this thing from entering. That wasn't a specter. Definitely not. It was a person. I could smell it, a strange smell of earth and herbs. And I could hear its breath. I know that when I tell you, you will not feel like that, but of everything that happened in this experience, that moment, feeling that woman on the other side of the door a few centimeters away, is the most terrifying thing I've ever lived. Because I lost control. Because the next thing that happened was that I said, "We don't have him here." And I don't know why I said that, but when those words came out of my mouth I knew what I was referring to. We don't have it here. My mom buried him leaving the city, in the forest. I kept talking. I even told him details of the place, details that I didn't know, or at least that I didn't know consciously, because then I knew that my mom talked to them on the phone while I slept next to her. I don't know if my brain reacted with information stored in it as a defense mechanism to save me, or if someone else rummaged inside me, if something forced me to say it. I stopped feeling the pressure on the door, and I was able to close it. I was in shock, immobile. I stayed at the door for about 20 minutes more, even though there was no one on the other side, until I heard the fence again. This time it was my brother opening the lock. He had finally returned. He for that time looked for all possible excuses not to be at home. His room was impossible to inhabit. Something very strange happened to us every time we passed by. We heard that someone was inside. Suddenly the door opened without us noticing, and we could see those hideous chaffs behind the bed. But the three of us gathered, and we all entered and turned on the light, and we realized that there was nothing. Until we closed the door with a key, we put a piece of furniture in front of her among all of us, and my brother, still reluctant to sleep in my mother's room, he slept in the one that was mine. I left the door open in my mother's and the light of the hall on. Sleeping like this was our reality. But everything that had started when that relic entered the house was worse after that visit, after that woman went home. And yes, when we carried the crucifix, something seemed to shake, as if the house had suddenly sown, as if those things that then scared us had always been there asleep and had suddenly woken up from that threat. But contrary to what my mother thought, by taking it far away, by seeking that it would not harm us or anyone else, it had left us alone, defenseless before that which had awakened, before everything that kept arriving as following the trail that left behind that artifact. One of the nights I clearly felt how someone, a small little hand touched my uncovered foot. I remember that in dreams I was very scared because I thought of that damn doll, and I quickly pulled my foot and got up with a start. And in that we saw, and I say we saw because my mom had woken up, how a child walked calmly out of the room. But very clear, not like a ghost, not like something out of a movie. It was a child about 4 years old who walked out of the room towards the hall. I felt my mom holding my hand, and before we could say it was a dream that we had imagined nothing else, we heard that little voice out there like singing as we moved away. My brother came out of his room and asked who was inside, and my mom started crying and told him that she already knew nobody. And we went out the three. My brother particularly angry, shouting that they leave us in peace, that they leave. And we went down and turned on all the lights. We threw the holy water that we had left, which was already little. Regularly when we sprinkled it around the house, things calmed down and we could sleep, but that time we felt almost as if we had been provoked to do so. And when my brother threw the last drops, he turned to see us. He knew he had made a mistake. Something happened to him. Something broke in my brother at that moment. And my mom went up with him to his room. He was entering into a kind of crisis. And it is that for him it had been very difficult to suddenly relive a trauma that he had long forgotten. He had become afraid again as if he were a small child and not a young man of 180 and 80 kilos. His blood pressure went up, and while my mom was trying to calm him down, I put water to boil to make him an herbal tea that they had sent us. Something was heard inside my brother's room, behind me, there next to the stairs, as if someone was moving stealthily, trying not to notice me. Despite the fact that the door was closed and that furniture was in front of her, I was very scared. I passed in front of the door to the stairs running as I prepared the tea, and I don't know why, but I knew. I really knew that if this time we opened the door again, this time there would be something inside. I arrived to the room with my mom, and my brother looked bad. My mother told me to look out the window. I am not going to ask you to believe the following. I am not going to ask you to believe anything. I share this especially with those very few people, 1 out of every 100, 1 out of every 1,000 perhaps, who have had a paranormal experience, who know that everything is possible. I also know that there will be people who will hear this and will make fun of it, but out there, in the banquet in front of me, there were 3 figures, 3 women. And I am completely sure that one of them was that woman with white hair, although I could not see her, because it was very dark. But I could see, to put it in a way, I could see that they were saying something, that they were moving their hands, and then I heard their voices inside the house, inside the room, between us. This is what I think they said, and I say it because it was not the last time I heard it, because I even dreamed of it later and I woke up trying to point the words, to find sense. It is Latin, and I made the mistake of saying it out loud again. I am going to share it with you. If you believe in this at least in the slightest, or if you are susceptible, please do not read it aloud. If you are listening to it, please fast forward a few seconds. If you are skeptics, you will not have any problem listening to the following. In tenebris non invenit inter pater manducare et manus tenu viscum aeternum in tenebris manducare intrat pater. The women walked along the sidewalk to the back of the street, and I lost sight of them. Down below, the furniture kissed in front of the door of the room next to the stairs was heard moving. We knew we couldn't stay. We helped my brother, and we lowered the door of the bedroom. When going down the stairs, it was open, and we passed by there in front without turning, and I looked for the keys of my mom's car in the living room in some place while she barely and could hold my brother. When I shouted that I found them, my mother whispered something to me. Don't turn. Don't look back. I walked slowly to her. I felt something on my back, something like a look that was sticking to me. We went out slowly. To this day, my mother has never told me what she saw, and I don't remember how we got there or what we said, but I woke up the next morning at Uncle's house. I was in the living room. My brother deeply asleep by my side. My mother was talking on the phone with my aunt in the town, and she told her that she was going to try to help us, but she didn't say anything. That's what my mother said, but she didn't know what she meant. Half an hour later, my aunt called. We were having breakfast, still trembling, weak, as if we had just gone through a fire or an accident or something like that. Pass me the address. Well, my aunt said. The father is going there. For the love of God, I hope you know where that thing you buried is. What would you do if you found out that in your house there was an artifact used in hundreds of exorcisms around the world? An artifact that became a catalyst for negative energies, for all the bad, and that at the same time can be a powerful weapon. It also represents a lot of danger. Imagine having a grenade in a house full of children. Yes, it could be a protection in some moment of emergency, in the war, but in another context. It only represents a latent danger for everyone around it. That's how the priest would explain it to us later. He couldn't take a record of all the different things we saw for those days. We had to wait 2 more for the priest who knew the grandmother to get to the city, and it was just in time because things at home were getting worse and worse. My brother's girlfriend went to visit him the day before. When he called her from outside to go out, my brother looked out the window and greeted her. When the girl came in, she asked about me, and my brother explained that I was not there, that I had gone with my godmother. But his girlfriend told him that she had just seen me, that when she looked out the window she was bringing me on her back, with her arms up and laughing at me, moving her head in a strange way. My brother had been very reluctant to talk about what was happening to us, fearing what people would think of him, but at that moment he had to explain and, well, the girl didn't take it the best way. You never like someone laughing at what's happening to you, at something serious, don't you think? And here I insist again on how difficult it is to share this type of experiences, because even the people who believe that they have seen things have a limit that they do not expect to pass, a limit of what they are willing to believe. We tried to get out of the house those days to hold on a little longer without the fact that the Father would arrive and guide us. And it is that at that moment we were still sufficiently naive enough to think that by moving away we would be safe. My brother was going to stay with his best friend who lived near the house, but he was making time in his girlfriend's house that afternoon, almost on the other side of the city. He felt better the more distance he put between him and that sound of bells. He saw me leave very early rumbo to my godmother's house, but he didn't know what time I was going to return. It was like 8 o'clock at night when something worried him all of a sudden, something that he felt in his chest. And the first thing he did was to borrow the telephone to call the house to make sure that everything was fine. The telephone barely rang, and he answered. He says he heard my mother and me talking in the background arguing. He says we said horrible things while he shouted at us to listen to him, but we seemed not to hear him. He said that my mother ran from the house, that she told me things that my brother did not dare to repeat. A little laugh was heard on the phone, like someone making fun of him, and then he hung up. My brother was already imagining things. He had just heard the bells behind him in the room of his girlfriend's little brother. He was going crazy, and it was better that he left there before everyone realized. He called his friend with whom he was going to stay and told him that he was already going there. When he left his girlfriend's house, where they had always treated her well, he could not imagine what he left behind and that he would never put a foot in her again. I was with my godmother. My mother sent me with her because she is perhaps the person with the most faith we know, extremely religious and a friend of the family for decades. If I was going to be safe somewhere, it would be with her. We told her what had happened. We trusted her, but when I got there, I realized that I only knew details, big details, and I took care of putting her to the flow of everything. It was the first time I really told her what was happening, without fear that they would believe me or not. I just said it. I needed to tell her. That someone else would know. And see that reaction in her eyes. I don't want something to come with us, godmother. I don't want anything to affect you. Maybe it's not good that I stay, I told her, but my godmother only smiled. If God is with me, who against me? But as soon as she said it, the smile was erased from her face. I don't know why. I don't know what happened to her. It was as if something had broken. As if something in her had decomposed. And made me remember for a moment what the old lady told me of that first time when she felt evil in front of her near her, of that afternoon approaching the cemetery when she stopped feeling God by her side. When we were going to go to bed, when everything was turned off, and I began to feel the same fear that I felt every time the night came and the hour of sleeping of being in the dark. My godmother looked out the door, already with her hair loose, in a shirt. She made a sign that I should come closer to her, that I should leave the room. I approached the door and left, but everything was already turned off. I didn't see her. I didn't see where she had gone. But when I turned, I saw how she got into a room. In an empty room that wasn't where she regularly slept. I walked down the dark corridor slowly. I didn't know where to turn on the damn light, and the darkness became increasingly difficult to bear. But I walked in search of my godmother. Something made me turn, a sound behind me in my godmother's room, but I ignored it, and I kept walking to get to the room where I saw her enter. The door was open, and a faint light came out from inside. When I got closer, I realized that I was lighting candles. It made a signal for me to pass. Godmother, is everything okay? No. There's someone in my room. My mom was with one of her sisters when she received the call from my aunt. She warned her that the father had left before, that he was going to arrive in a while at dawn, and that she should do her the favor of receiving him. "He's going to your house," she said. She didn't want them to spend more time alone there. The plan to separate us all that night and to move us away from the house had just been ruined, but my mom appreciated the disposition and the goodwill of the father. Who else in his right mind rushes to arrive at a place where there are beings of low astral loose all over the house? But that was his vocation, to fight against evil in the world. My mom and my aunt left quickly for the house, but my aunt just left her and left. She wasn't afraid regularly, but things weren't for the brave. Before she entered, someone greeted my mom. It was the neighbor with her puppy. I don't know how old that poor dog is, but he still lives today, although he can't go out for a walk. "I was about to call you," he said. "I knew you weren't at your house because your children have had the TV at full volume since the afternoon. And Mom didn't want to tell her that there was no one at home." She accepted the comment, the complaint of the neighbor who continued telling her how she didn't have to let us watch horror movies, that brought bad energies. Well, at least my mom wanted the neighbors not to see us as the weirdos, that they wouldn't realize what was happening, that they wouldn't cross the street when they passed in front of our house, that the neighbor would keep talking when all this happened, because we still believed it would happen. She called my brother from the garden, waiting for him to answer so that he could go home and not be so alone, but he sounded busy. He was walking around the garden without having the courage to enter. He left his bag and went out into the street, discreetly, to see if he could pass the neighbor back and talk to her. Whatever it was better than being in there. But nobody passed, and the street was already deserted. He didn't want to mark me. He knew that my godmother slept religiously early, so he assumed that by that time I would be asleep. But it wasn't like that. I was having a bad time. My godmother and I locked ourselves in and we started praying for a while. I already had all the lights in the room on. "Nina, who's there? Did we call someone?" "Don't worry, my daughter. We're going to try to sleep," she told me with a nervous smile. Her little hands didn't stop shaking. My godmother Chubby had the most kindest appearance in the world, so it hurt me even more to see her so terrified. The glasses were covered with her, and I didn't know why. We lay down in some small chairs in that room, and I couldn't stop hearing her sobbing that seemed to cry, but very slowly so that I wouldn't hear it. I was crying with fear. It was more than an hour later, it was almost 12, when I could barely begin to close my eyes out of exhaustion, although it is very difficult to sleep when you are scared like that. But as soon as I closed my eyes, just for a moment, a few seconds, I heard my godmother begin to pray in a loud voice, and I smelled a horrible smell, a disgusting smell that I later found out was sulfur. I turned to my godmother, who closed her eyes with force as if not wanting to see anything. I could see her with all clarity because the light of the candles was enough to half illuminate the room, and I heard something in the door, something that made me turn. I could see that something moved, that something hid, and then I saw the key. It was red alive. I got up quickly and went to my godmother to ask her how she was, what she had, and after a few minutes in which I could calm her down, she told me that she kept praying in a low voice when she saw that I was falling asleep. That calmed her down a little, but she kept praying, and then that smell came to her, and she heard the door open. It just opened. No one could be seen until something came out through the door from the top, but crouching. That is to say, it was something much higher than the door. My godmother says it was a figure with horns that had horned horns and a face like this animal, but there were two horrible details. The eyes. The eyes were human, and the mouth and the teeth too, and I taught them, and I moved my mouth as if I were chewing something, but with a peeled tooth. It was when he closed his eyes and began to roar, and that plague ended up awakening me. There were noises out there. Something was in the house, walking and moving things as if nothing, and in the end I managed to convince my godmother to leave, that we could not stay there. "No, it's my house, she kept repeating, even when I helped her put on a jacket to go out into the cold that had broken out in the city. We left through the back door without turning to the living room, and we went around the whole house. Inside, it was still heard as if someone was checking among the things. When my brother arrived with his friend, he did not want to tell him about it. Between them there was so much trust that he had nothing to explain to tell him that if he could stay there that night it was more or less normal. But his friend Fair noticed immediately that something was happening. Do you believe in ghosts? My brother asked him, realizing that he had never spoken to him about the subject. Of course, there are two here. Well, that says my mother. I have never seen anything. She says it's the old folks who built the house. Fair kept talking, and my brother got nervous, thinking if what caused that damn crucifix had hit him, if now we were taking him with us everywhere. What I didn't want was to know the story of the apparitions in that house, but Fair kept telling him, having fun, without knowing what was causing my brother. He began to get out of breath. He gave him a. Days before, he had an attack when he realized that the harlequin had returned. He sat down, and his friend, realizing what was happening, tried to calm him. He called out to his mother and went to get water. My brother felt Fair's mother put her hands on his shoulders to comfort him. Finally, Fernando returned with water, and behind him, his mother entered, just waking up. My brother paused, realizing that no one else was in the room and that no one had placed their hands on his shoulders. I'm going home, he said. I have to go home. Hearing this, Fernando grabbed his car keys. Yes, we're going to your house, he replied. I found my mom smoking in the garden when I arrived with my godmother, and a little while later, my brother and Fair arrived. His friend just turned to us to see us with a scared face. It was evident from the expression we all had, especially my godmother, that something very strange was happening. As we were all together, we encouraged ourselves to enter. My godmother was convinced that God had put her there to help us through this experience, to give us the faith that we had less and less. My brother wanted to convince Fair to leave, that we were going to be fine, but Fernando ignored him as he called his house to let them know that he wasn't going to be home and would be out all night. When we entered, the first thing we did was put the furniture in front of the door of the room next to the stairs. We prepared coffee upstairs. It sounded as if a family were living there, as if it were the middle of the day, and we all sat around the table in silence drinking coffee. My brother found some loaves of bread. They were probably days old, but they were enough to eat with the coffee. I could swear that in the distance, outside the house, I saw those Latin words, as if those women were close, as if they were still calling for something, as if they wanted to punish us. And despite everything we had seen, despite the fact that I already knew that the supernatural exists, that it was among us at all times, that it was there in the house, despite that, those women terrified me more than anything. Especially the one with white hair, who had been a few centimeters from me, trying to enter the house. We heard a car on the street, and as a reflex, we all got up from the table. It was a taxi. A priest had arrived. That father had finally arrived, and he did it at the most important moment, at a time when we began to lose our reason, to feel somehow more and more overwhelmed by that pressure in the chest that seemed to begin to eat us little by little inside. When he entered, when we received him, we felt something very strange, as if his aura, his energy, were a fresh air blow to the hell we lived in at home, as if he were bringing with him pure energy of good. That's what I felt, but a while later in the kitchen, my brother asked me, "You too felt it?" I asked him what he meant. I felt it very clear. He said, "The grandmother comes with the father." The father talked for a moment with us, with all of us who were there, including my godmother and my brother's friend, and then we met in the room to define what we were going to do. Sorry, but what we're going to do, we have to do it tonight. I'm sure it's not that I'm taking away your sleep. If that's what I imagine, I doubt you're going to sleep tonight anyway." We all nodded. We all knew he was right. We were sitting around the chairs in the living room, except Fair, who was no longer fit, and he was recharged in the bar that separated the living room from the kitchen. I noticed that he kept looking back, and that from his position he could see the window that led to the backyard. My brother also noticed, and he asked if everything was fine. "Was anyone coming with you, father?" Fair asked. "No, son." "Why? There's a woman looking this way, out there." Just then, when he said it, we heard many steps outside, many, as if a dozen people had suddenly moved, as when you throw a stone at a tree and a flock of birds flies out. We rushed to close, I to the back door to make sure it was closed, but the father went to the front, and instead of closing it, to put the safe, he opened it and ran out trying to discover, who or what were the causes of that ruckus. But nothing was seen. We all reached outside. Far, very far. We heard some laughter, like women. "We need to go and look for that crucifix now, but we need someone to stay here. It's no coincidence that they're wandering. Who's the father? What's going on?" my mom asked. But the father was so eager to share with us more, as if he didn't want to give us too much information. "Pero después de unos minutos, creo, entendió que él no ser personas de fe, como con las que él estaba acostumbrado a tratar. Íbamos a necesitar más información al respecto o no le haríamos caso. Y fue entonces cuando nos dijo que esa situación, que esas mujeres rodeando una casa, asomados, queriendo entrar, lo recordaban mucho a lo que contó aquel joven del pueblo vecino, al que ayudó junto a la abuela. That's how it all started in his house. And then something got into his sister. I'm not saying that the same thing is going to happen here, but there are things around here that I don't even understand. And I don't want to risk them. Do you agree?" he told us. And we all sat down again. My mother and he prepared to go out. My brother and Fair insisted that they be let go with them. The father replied that he needed them to be strong to stay here with us and to pray even if they did not believe, to pray with all their might. The eyes of my poor godmother were increasingly lost in fear, but I knew that she did not regret helping us. Sabia que ella haría lo posible por mantenernos a salvo mientras pudiera, y el padre la vio. Le noto mal, y le hizo un comentario en privado a mi mamá, quien le pidió entonces que fuera con ellos. Media hora después, estaban saliendo, por fin, a buscar aquel artefacto. Mientras tanto, Fair, mi hermano y yo, nos preparamos para aguantar toda la noche. When they left, someone rang the door on the street. We all went out together to see who it was. It was the neighbor, the one who had greeted my mom a while ago. She was worried. From her house, she had noticed a lot of movement. "Something happened? Is everyone okay?" I was just about to ask your mom, but I saw her pass by in the car and she looked upset. "Everything is fine, don't worry," I told her. While we were talking to her, the neighbor kept turning her back. Hacia nuestras espaldas, hacia la casa al segundo piso o al techo, no sé bien, pero nos dijo que la esperamos un momento, que no nos fuéramos a meter. Regreso con su pero ese que les digo que hoy sigue vivo, ya muy viejito, se puede quedar con ustedes. Nos preguntó. I don't know what he thinks, but it's not necessary for him to leave us the dog, my brother said. "No, I know. I know nothing is happening, but I wanted to know if they could take care of him, nothing else. And they'll come back to me in the morning." Before we could come up with another pretext, Fernando said yes as if it were his house, and he opened the door to put the dog in. A chow chow too quiet for his breed, which is usually hyperactive and brave. The neighbor thanked us with a smile and disappeared running, as if he were going to leave the dog. The dog, as soon as he entered, sat in front of the stairs, looking up. "Well, we have it covered," said Fair. "Nothing is going to go down from the second floor." As soon as he said that, a door opened up there, as if it had blown air, but the puppy took several steps back. He was still expectant, caring, but without a doubt, something had made him nervous. Meanwhile, my mother, my godmother and my father advanced silently to leave the deserted city and take the road. Mi madre bajo la velocidad para intentar ubicar el lugar donde se había detenido en aquella ocasión. Entonces, padre, le dijo mi madrina, vamos a buscar esa granada, como usted lo dijo, para que vuelvan a tenerla en su casa. No, señora. Vamos a buscar ese crucifijo que es tan peligroso como una granada, que quizás es eso lo único que nos puede ayudar. Mi mamá se detuvo un poco en un lugar donde había varios restaurantes como puestecitos al lado de la carretera. Ahí esa hora ya parecían tenebrosos, hundidos en la oscuridad de la zona. Los árboles detrás parecían comérselos poco a poco. Sí, vi a ser por aquí cerca. Un poquito más adelante ya debe ser. They advanced a little further, and finally she recognized a place with difficulty, because that zone changes a lot at night, more in a dark one like that. The father told my godmother to stay, to wait for them. Do you know how to drive? He asked. Yes, responded my godmother. Okay. Entonces pongas al volante. Pongas lista para irnos en cuanto estemos de vuelta con lo que vamos a buscar. Why no la vaya a abrir a nadie? Aunque vengan a pedir ayuda, ¿está bien? Ay, padre, a esta hora en medio del bosque, ¿quién va a venir a hablarme? El padre solo la vio y la mirada lo dijo todo. Mi madrina puso todos los seguros. Mi mamá avanzó con su lámpara. El padre caminó detrás de ella. Entraron al bosque. In the house, the dog was still like a statue nailed in front of the stairs. We prepared heavily loaded coffee. We didn't dare to turn on the radio, the television, or anything. We were prepared to run away or to defend ourselves from what was about to happen. Someone knocked on the door, and the dog made a scream. He went straight to Fair's arms. Despite the fact that we were waiting, it took us so much surprise that we got up and turned around. We didn't even know which of the two doors it had been. When they knocked for the second time, we noticed it. They were knocking from inside that room in front of the stairs, the one with a piece of furniture in front of it, locking the door, the one that no one entered in a long time ago. First began to laugh at the nerves. He repeated that there must have been someone there, that someone had passed, and he walked as if to remove the furniture and check it, according to him, but we stopped him between the two. No one's here, I swear. No one's here, my brother said. Leave the furniture, please. Someone turned the knob. And he opened the door. The only thing that stopped her was the furniture. And when Fernando saw this, he pushed him to stop her and asked us to help him. Yes, in a second it had changed its appearance. It was evident that there was something inside. Something that for no reason we could allow to come out. The dog ran behind us and jumped up the stairs to the second floor, where he was barking very aggressively at something. There was something up there too. My mom and the priest were moving through the forest. It was absolutely dark. They couldn't see anything other than what they could light with their lanterns. They felt like they were going to trip at every step. Wait, said the father to my mother. Turn off your lamp. They turned off both their lights and remained silent. Far, far away they heard some footsteps. The father whispered to them to keep absolute silence, that they would not breathe. And in that, my mother's eyes could adapt to that darkness. Dice que a unos metros tan solo a unos metros pudo ver como pasaba una mujer caminando de pelo largo blanco en la misma dirección que ellos levaban esperar en un minuto después de que se alejó para susurrarse y decidir que hacer ella viene por lo mismo le dijo el padre ya debe saber donde está no. Father, we're almost there. We have to hurry. It's under. No, he interrupted her. Don't tell me where it is. Just tell me when we get there. They kept on moving. The father turned on his lamp, but he covered it with his hand. He wanted to illuminate as little as possible, reduce the possibilities that they saw them or knew where they were going. Un disparo se asuco a lo lejos en lo profundo del bosque en casa nos atrevimos a subir las tres para buscar al pobre pero había dejado de ladrar pero lo vimos mirando fijamente a la habitación de mi mamá que tenía la puerta abierta y una luz tenue parecía salir de allí, said a voice, the voice of a woman, an old woman, and my brother held my hand tight. We were left alone from the scare, but the dog no longer barked. And then we got that unmistakable aroma, a smell of flowers, plants, freshly watered land, the smell of the grandmother's garden. Faye tried to get down by her phone, but she stopped halfway down the stairs. Something stinks down there, she said when she came back. We entered my mom's room and we locked the three of us there with the dog. We closed the door. There was no more than an hour left for it to dawn. If we could hold on there, we would be safe. In the forest, my mother and father were surprised by that shot from afar and continued their way, approaching where they had heard it. The voices seemed to come from among the trees, and then they could see the light of several lamps between the branches. They had to make the decision of announcing themselves from afar, risking that they would hurt them, or hide there until they could continue. They didn't have much time, so they had to choose the first option. The father shouted and greeted with his lamp from afar. Three ranchers approached them, yelling that they didn't know it was private property, but when they saw that it was a priest and a lady, they changed their tone of voice. What are you doing here? It's dangerous, we're looking for something. Something we lost here, my mom said. On a walk, the father interrupted her. We left something on a walk with sentimental value, on a walk. We lost it here close and we're looking for it. Of course, it wasn't believable. That they were looking for something, in the dark, at dawn. But the ranchers decided to trust them, or pretend they did. Can we help you? Yes, I was close to a huge fallen tree, burned by a lightning. The father looked at my mom. When he said it out loud, he knew they had less time. The ranchers looked at each other and told them that it was a little further ahead, that they were almost about to arrive. They kept walking, and the father asked one of them, the youngest, what they had shot at, what they were hunting. We're scaring the witches, father. They come every day. The father tried to walk a little slower to be able to. The father tried to walk a little slower to be able to delve into the subject, without the others noticing. What, son? Is this a witch's area, or do they have little to see? You shouldn't believe those things, right, father? Interrupted one of the older men, and the father kept silent. He knew at that moment that he could not find out more about it. My mother asked the father to hurry, so she gave my godmother a hand. The ranchers asked her if there was anyone else with them, and they answered yes, that a senior lady who had been left in the car on the road. When they heard him, without saying anything, they went fast in that direction. But first, that man told them that what they were looking for was a few steps ahead, and that they would wait on the road. The young man took the man's father and said, "Always father, but these days it's been worse." They advanced a little more. "It's here, right?" said the father. My mother turned back and followed the light of the father. She illuminated that tree that had just passed by. "Yes, over here, father." "Help me." My mother was confused. There were two branches that reminded her a lot of the one she had taken as a signal, so each one began to remove the earth from one. It would not be so difficult. It was wet. My mother did not take long to feel something. She felt it like the crucifix. She tore it out of the earth with force, and she was horrified when she realized what it was. It was a leg of a doll, and she knew very well what doll it was. The father turned worried by the scream of my mother, and he lit towards her. Between the earth, a chaff came out. Escuchamos un ruido ala abajo el perro comenzó a ladrar decidimos abrir la puerta pero aquellas palabras seguían en la habitación como flotando quédense aquí arriba no estoy segura de si la seguía escuchando pero todos la sentíamos no puedo explicarlo but we heard the door of the lower room open, that door that, unlike all the others at home, for our luck and because of the way its interior was built, opened outwards. My brother left our room and took a few steps down the stairs. He saw something very strange, something that only made sense when my mother told us what was happening in the forest at that time. My brother says he saw a person, or something the size of a person, leave that room. It was. He was dressed like his little harlequin. And he jumped on one foot. And he went to the door. My brother could only see the silhouette, but that hat was unmistakable. El sonido de como salía de la casa. Lo pudimos escuchar todos. The father found the crucifix, and something was heard again between the branches. A little further ahead, as if several people were approaching. But something arrived quickly from behind. Era uno de los rancheros, el joven, que les pidió que se apuraran. Ya están mis tíos con la señora. Denle para ala. Aquí yo le echo un ojo a estas. El muchachito que no debía tener más de 16 años se quedó viéndose a la oscuridad con una escapada que parecía pesar la mitad de su cuerpo en nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti Amen dijo el padre con el crucifijo en sus manos dice mi madre que se sintió en ese momento como si una cortina hubiera quedado alrededor una cortina que los mantenía en la oscuridad de pronto el aire era menos pesado de pronto el frío pareció ser menos avasallador todo va a estar bien hijo. Le dijo el padre al muchacho y avanzó con mi madre hacia la carretera. Tienen que irse de su casa muy lejos por unos días permitanme quedarme allí mientras tanto I need to make sure they'll be safe afterwards. I need to know what they have there, that they can live in relative peace from now on. The priest told my mother as they walked, relatively? She asked, "It's not easy, ma'am. I'm sorry to say it. Esto no se limpia del todo. Si lo hago bien, tendrían que dejar de molestarlos, pero, si les soy sincero, lo más probable es que mucho de lo que llego se quede allí con ustedes, aunque no pueda notarlo. Llegaron al carro donde mi madrina los esperaba junto a los rancheros, que a lo lejos, en cuanto los vieron acercarse, caminaron por la carretera avanzando. My godmother was distressed, talking about some ladies who were nearby, looking at the car, looking from the grass, but who left as soon as they heard those kind gentlemen approaching. The father smiled when she described them as kind. They didn't look so much like him. When they got home, it was already dawn. I felt at least that I had spent days without sleep. El padre tomó una caja que lavaba y colocó el crucifijo allí. Yo no lo quise ver. Nos quedamos todos dormidos en la sala por unas horas hasta que nos despertó el ruidajo que hacía mi madrina y el padre al preparar el desayuno. Mi hermano y fer fueron a devolver al perro. Nos vamos a ir unas semanas, explicó mi mamá. Y aunque mi madrina ofreció su casa, decidimos que fuera más lejos, fuera de la ciudad. But before that, before we left, that day while we were packing our bags, my father and my mother went to a convent on the other side of the city. My mother says, although she has not told us everything, that they spoke to the Mother Superior, that the father explained the situation, and told her that they needed to leave something there that belonged to my mother, to my family, and that it was likely that at some point they would have to return for him, or that someone else would come to require it, to need it. I have to warn you, it is difficult to have it. Mother.me entiende aquí vamos a estar bien le respondió y estaremos esperando para devolverlo al menos eso fue lo que dijo la madre porque desde entonces no vamos por el y no tenemos planes de hacerlo sabemos no tenemos idea de si provocó algo en ese lugar lo que lamentablemente si sabemos es que aunque vivimos un tiempo tranquilos luego de todo el trabajo del padre en casa, eventualmente ciertas presencias volvieron. Sabemos también de lo que ocurrió en casa de la ex novia de mi hermano, de eso que hizo que no volvieran ni siquiera a contestarle sus llamadas. Sabemos de lo que ocurrió en casa de Fer, de las visitas que ha tenido el padre Ala, en la iglesia del pueblo. Sabemos de aquello que pareció haber despertado y aferros a la casa de mi madrina, que hoy en día sigue allí, algo cuyo nombre no puedo pronunciar. Seguimos lidiando años después con ese eco, con el eco de los conjuros, del crucifijo del padre Lucas. To close this story, the compilation that we have made of these episodes that maintained their interest and curiosity during the past month, we are going to tell two small stories that accompanied the main one. Next, we present to you the experiences in the church of the priest and in the house of the ex-girlfriend of the brother of the protagonist. We are left waiting for what happened at Fair's house, the friend, and about that being with a Chivo head but with human factions. They have asked us to not share anything. They tell us, according to the person who shared this story, that is a very strong presence and prefer not to get out of control, being that in the last year the appearances have become more and more sporadic. That is, why move him? If this lady has been calm lately, it is better to leave her like that. The names of the protagonists of these stories have been shared with us, but we are going to omit them. This is the epilogue of the crucifixion of Father Lucas. It was very curious what happened to the poor father, even after years of having come to our aid. As we know, even recently, he continues to deal with the consequences. And it is that, as you may have noticed from the experience, the father really did not touch the strongest of what we lived, and those days before returning to Guanajuato he even had time to make some encomiendas here and wait for a known person from the town to come who already had a planned return to return with him. So he did, but it was as if then until days later all the tiredness, all the stress, and all the fear that must have accumulated in him had fallen on him in the course of the days when they took the road. It was very early at night, and the father fell asleep. He said that in the dream he could hear screams of women flying over the trees following the cart, like turning in pain. He woke up in a panic attack, and they had to lean over there for him to go down to vomit, and he vomited something very black, something like a bruise, and the man who was carrying him was scared. "This is not normal, father," he said. "Let me take him to a doctor." But the father knew very well that he was beginning to pay the bill for that meeting he had had. He was not going to get rid of what was for some reason following the crucifix, days later, already in the town, because Soledad talked in the store with a person from that neighboring town, where I had gone with my grandmother years ago, and it is that there both were a kind of legend, although all the priests who had arrived later bothered them and all questioned the work they had done in that kind of exorcism. "You know what happened there in the village, father?" asked that public transport driver in a mock tone. That the witches had their party in the old pantheon and removed tombs. And they dug up bones. You can see that they are dead bodies from a long time ago. The father knew that that old house where it all happened had been abandoned for years, that all that hill was deserted and no one went up to that pantheon, to the dead who were left there. They had run out of the living. "What witches?" he asked. "I thought they no longer believed in those things." No, Father, we didn't believe it. But one night, suddenly, we heard screams coming down from there, and we saw lights in the sky, as if they had big bonfires that bounced in the clouds. And then a handful of women from the town came out of their houses, naked, and they came running up there, and they didn't come down. We still had many witches with us without knowing it. Even my cousin Lupita, Father, went over there. Tan sentido y tan católica que se veo padre corroboro después con autoridades que en efecto se habían registrado desapariciones pero se seguían investigando pero algo había pasado algo fuerte lástima que ya no tuviera los elementos para ir a investigar sería problema de alguien más del sacerdote de aquel pueblo a lo mejor he did not believe in that and saw the beliefs of witches as primitive traditions of the place and let it pass, and for moments he even managed to forget everything until weeks later the knocking of a door with the wind woke him up in the morning. When he got up to see, he realized that it was open, that safe he had inside had opened without being forced, as if someone from inside the house, behind the church, had done it, even though he was the only one there. He closed it, thinking that perhaps he had not closed it that night, but he barely got into bed. I heard him again. The door was open. He returned to her, and he looked out into the darkness, in that black night, trying to see her. He knew she was there. He could feel her. Somewhere, that white-haired woman was watching him, even though that absolute black reigned outside. He closed the door, secured it with a chair, and tried to sleep. However, this began to repeat itself several times a week. At some point, the night when they did not open the door or the window of his room or his office, where he found the papers watered everywhere as if a tornado had hit, until one of those nights, when he got up, again before those noises that had become almost daily, he could also hear voices. Voices that came from the other end of that corridor, from the church. He approached, and indeed they were voices, voices that prayed the rosary. When he opened the door to see what was happening, the voices had already been silenced. Everything. He was in darkness and lit a nearby candle because the light switch was at the other end. What he saw marked him even now. Inside the church, sitting on the benches, were at least 10 women, covered to the head. They had been silent when he opened the door, but they all seemed to look at him. He thought about praying, but these women were already doing it, as a joke perhaps, a sign that he had no power there. So he just closed the door and went to his room to pray. These apparitions became constant, every night, praying in a loud voice outside his door, making him feel his prayers were useless. They wanted him to go through the crucifix, that it was the only way. It was then, when this idea kept repeating in his head, that he realized that was what they were looking for. The apparitions continued, though not every night, but the father managed to pacify them and convince himself they couldn't hurt him. At least, that's what he believes so far. This experience also ended my brother's long-term relationship, one where they had both gotten very close to each other's families. We, for example, still miss my brother's girlfriend and are happy when she calls to say hello and see how we are. But on that occasion, my brother took something that manifested in that house, and the family wouldn't let him enter again. The girl can't come here either. That afternoon, no one knew what my brother had heard, why he left that place the way he did. The only one who knew anything was his girlfriend, but he hadn't believed her. He'd even made fun of her for believing it and being so worried. They were waiting for dinner in that house. The girlfriend's little brother was with a neighbor, and his room was empty. That's why Mom was surprised when she passed by and clearly heard someone walking in there, like in circles, incessantly. She tried to ignore it, perhaps wisely, but when she passed back to the living room to prepare dinner, she couldn't ignore it. She heard it, approached the door, and stood silently, about to open it when the noises stopped. He tried to forget it, but that night brought another surprise. A tremendous headache wouldn't let her sleep, and after much effort, when fatigue won, she could, but only to have nightmares. When she told her dream about her daughter in the morning, Everything clicked related to what we were living at home. In the dream, the lady saw her son asleep. She saw him from the door, but behind him, sitting in bed as if he'd been lying down moments before, was a figure. A man. Dressed like a harlequin. He was looking at her, staring fixedly, and signaling with his finger for her to be quiet. The poor lady woke up at that moment. Dawn was near, and she went to check. Everything was fine, but it was terribly cold in that room, and the poor little boy was shivering and talking in his sleep. The mother woke him up, telling him something was happening, and he went to his sister's room, where there was an extra bed. When he returned to his room, he saw his 3 cats standing in the middle of the yard through the glass door. He approached the door and told them to come inside, but the animals ignored him. They looked up, to the ceiling. Through the reflection in the car window next to the cats, she says she saw a figure sitting on the roof, a figure that looked too much like what she'd just seen in her dreams. She tried to ignore it all. She tried to blame it on her dreams, her fatigue, her headache. But something else was going to happen, something that would change their lives forever. Especially his youngest daughter, who was only 7 years old at the time. This happened just 2 days later. It was night, and the girl was bathing, preparing for bed, when she heard someone enter the bathroom. Without opening her eyes because she was washing her hair, she asked them to leave. She was already big and embarrassed they saw her naked. But this figure placed itself just behind the curtain. It was too tall to be her brother or her dad, and though the figure was blurry, the little girl noticed it was missing a leg. She started screaming when this thing fell on her and pulled the curtain, but luckily her dad was close and came in to see what was happening. The girl wouldn't stop screaming. She wouldn't stop screaming that something had attacked her, that something had scratched her, and the dad heard someone moving away from the corridor. He ran out and saw it enter his son's room, and when he followed, he saw a figure, now the size of a doll, hiding under the bed. The rest of the family had already come because of the poor girl's screams, and they all got up from the bed and searched every corner without finding absolutely anything more than a hole in the wall, barely big enough for a mouse to hide there. When the girlfriend, full of fear, called my brother to tell him, my brother asked if what they saw needed a leg. She said yes, and her mother was listening and took the phone to tell him to stay away from them and not come near her daughter or her house again. She didn't even let my brother tell her that he could help, that he knew how, and that girl, now old, hasn't fully recovered her speech. She stutters a little, and the family continues to blame my brother for this incident. We know that this is not the last appearance they have suffered. We believe that that person withdrew from our house and hid there, but they have no longer trusted us.